God. And I think those who are responsible for the programs that we are using in our church, but I do want to continue that subject, being faithful to God. And I really looked at this subject and I wanted this particular text. Now, I'm telling you, if you can't relate to the text we're going to read this morning, and the text is in Luke. It is in the Gospel of Luke. And this text is an interesting text. It is a text that is familiar with us and familiar to us, but I want to read this text because it speaks to this issue of being faithful to God. It is in Luke chapter 10, and it is around verse number 38 that I really want to look at this verse, but I want to focus on verse 40. And I preached this text before, but I don't want to look at but one person in this particular story, and I want to talk about being faithful to God. Now, I want to use necessarily or not necessarily this particular subject that I want to pin this particular text with. It's being faithful and frustrated all at the same time. Now, if you don't know anything about being faithful and frustrated, you probably hadn't served and you probably hadn't did much in life. Because in life, as you serve God, you can be both faithful and frustrated. And in this text, we're going to see a woman who had been serving God and was faithful to God, but she was both faithful and serving God, but she was frustrated while she was being faithful. And listen, you'll be able to relate to this. If you can't relate to the verse that I'm going to read, and that's verse 40, you probably hadn't been serving much in the church, and you probably hadn't been doing much in the church. But this particular verse can also be related to your personal life, your life of serving your family, serving your children, working on your job, and being benevolent toward people in other organizations and areas of your life. Because sometimes as you are serving and being faithful to what you've been called to do or what you signed up to do, you can become very frustrated. And we're going to see in this text a woman who was faithful but frustrated. Now, I'm telling you, if you read the details of this story, what I have learned to do as I read scripture now, some of the same scriptures I've preached before, is to look at them from God's point of view. I want you to look at the characters in the story, but I also want you to look at what God is trying to teach and communicate to us. Because in this lesson, we're going to see three particular characters. We're going to see Jesus, we're going to see Mary, and we're going to see Martha. But I want to focus primarily on Martha because Martha is the central character in this particular text. But I also want you to put your finger on John chapter 11. Because as Mary and Martha in particular is serving Jesus, a crisis arises in their life. But I want you to look at Jesus' response, because it's not only going to be frustration in the life of Martha in this text, but also in John chapter 11, she's going to be frustrated with Jesus a second time. And my brothers and sisters, she's frustrated with him in Luke chapter 10, verse 40, but she becomes frustrated again with Jesus in John chapter 11. And the frustration in John chapter 11 is way more serious than what she experiences in Luke chapter 10, verse 40. But Martha is a woman who is faithful but frustrated, and that's what Christians go through sometimes. You can be faithful but become frustrated. And I want to look at why she was frustrated in this particular text, and I really don't want to focus too much on John chapter 11. And John records the death of Lazarus, the response of Jesus, and Martha meeting Jesus as he comes after he had delayed his arrival for 3 days. And when they came and told Martha that Jesus was on the way, she ran out to meet him, and she voiced her frustration to Jesus. And I really don't want to get into that at this particular time, but I'm telling you, she was frustrated. But yet she was faithful. She still trusted Jesus. She still loved him. And she still carried out her responsibility to Jesus Christ. But she was frustrated. Now, the question I have to ask Are you ever frustrated? Do you get frustrated? Does frustration ever set in? Are there moments in your life when you do the best you can, all that you can, but yet and still you become frustrated? You get frustrated. And in this text, we're going to see why Martha got frustrated. And I guarantee you why Martha got frustrated is some of the same reasons why you get frustrated sometimes. Because Martha was looking around and she was looking at and she was agitated and she was frustrated and she was aggravated because she was really working hard. And so let me teach you this particular lesson about being faithful and frustrated all at the same time. But let me tell you what I want to first admire about Martha. She didn't quit. She didn't walk out. She didn't give up. She didn't throw in the towel. And the problem I have with church folk is this. You stay everywhere else. You get frustrated at work, but you stay at work. You don't quit. You don't go home. You get frustrated in the fraternities, the sororities, the groups that you are a part of. You get frustrated, but you never quit and go home. You might quit a job, but you're going to find another job. You're not going to get so frustrated that you're just going to quit altogether. Sometimes you have to work and be frustrated because you understand that the work will pay off and you're going to reap if you are faithful in carrying out your responsibilities in spite of your frustration. And if I were going to bring this in the context of the church, my brothers and sisters, don't ever give up. Don't ever give in. Don't ever throw in the towel. Don't quit because you're frustrated. Don't quit when you get frustrated. And don't give in when you have to work in a frustrating situation. So let me read this text, and I just want to read verse 40 because it's going to explain to us a woman who is faithful but frustrated. Let's look at what this text says, and I'm going to teach this particular lesson, and it ought to encourage you, it ought to instruct you, it ought to motivate you in your Christian service to God. Be faithful over a few things, and God is going to grant you a privilege to be over much more. But Martha was distracted by much serving, and she came to Jesus and said, Lord, do thou care that my sister has left me alone. Bid her to help me. You may be seated. I read the amplified version of that particular text. Now, everything in this one verse speaks to why Martha was frustrated. I need to give you in the interim of this text to tell you that the house of Martha, Mary, and Lazarus was used as a retreat, a place of refreshment for Jesus. Whenever his disciples would get through working, performing miracles, or Jesus would finish a teaching session, they would always retreat to the house of Martha, Mary, and Lazarus. They would often use that house, that residence, for a place of refreshment, a place of rest, and a place of leisure, and a place to fellowship. And whenever they would go to the house of Mary, Martha, and Lazarus, they would get a meal. We know in this particular text that Martha was responsible for preparing the meals. We know that Mary helped her on other occasions. We know that because the text indicates that. And we do understand that in Jewish culture, Lazarus wouldn't have been in the kitchen, he wouldn't have been helping the women, but he would have hosted, he would have met Jesus and the disciples at the door. He would be like the person who would welcome them in. He would be the person that would talk with them, to entertain them, to make sure they had everything that they need as long as they were in his house. And many believe that the host would have a basin of water, and what he would do when those guests came in, he would bow down to wash the feet of those, because when they ate in a Jewish household, they wouldn't sit at a table, but they would sit down and recline on the floor. They would lay on one arm and they would be around the table, and the women would serve. And in this particular culture, we saw the women were in charge of the meal. They were in charge of setting the table. They were in charge of making sure that the guests had everything that they needed in the area of refreshment. And we see in the text that Jesus is going to be there. His disciples are there. And so the house is full. And as As on other occasions, we see Martha in the kitchen working. She's preparing the meal, and she really didn't know when Jesus and his disciples were coming, but she always expected them. And sometimes she had to operate in a moment's notice. And so they came, and she immediately went into the kitchen to prepare a meal as Lazarus welcomed them into the house. But on this particular occasion, something very interesting happens. When Jesus gets into the house of Mary, Martha, and Lazarus, he sits down and begins to teach his disciples. And this time at this teaching session, there is one that is called Mary. Mary is interesting because she does not go into the kitchen to help Martha, but the text says she decides to stay in the room where Jesus is teaching his disciples, and she sits at his feet and she listens attentively at Jesus' teaching as he teaches his disciples. And imagination would suggest, if you let me, you could see Martha in the kitchen cooking and cutting and slicing and watching the dishes that she has on the stove and in the oven. And every now and then she would stop and go peep into the living room. And she's wondering where Mary is. And she goes the first time and she looks into the living room and she sees Mary sitting at the feet of Jesus. She go back into the kitchen to cook and to prepare the meal. And then it becomes overwhelming. Some things starts to boil over. Things start to burn. And she leaves things in the oven and stove too long. And then she needs ingredients that she can't get her hands to because she has a lot going on. And I can see her pausing again, going into the living room, and still sees Mary sitting at the feet of Jesus. And this is the second time. And finally she goes back into the kitchen. She begins to serve, and she now has the meal prepared. And now it's time to serve the meal to Jesus and his 12 disciples. And she goes in the third time, and she sees Mary sitting at the feet of Jesus after she had cooked and prepared, and she had gotten everything together. Now it's time to bring it out of the kitchen and set it at the table. And she's expecting Mary to now, if she missed the first part, she's definitely expecting her to be a part of the second part. And so she sees Mary sitting at the feet of Jesus. And it's very interesting in this particular text that she doesn't address Mary, but she addresses Jesus. Her concern is that her sister was letting her do all the work, leaving her to do it all by herself. And she's now frustrated. She's frustrated because of what she sees. She's frustrated because of what she's been doing. And now she's frustrated because of the work that is in front of her or that is before her, because now she has to serve. After doing all of this work, the person that would usually help her to come along to help make her burdens lighter, she sees them sitting at the feet of Jesus. And she doesn't address Mary, but she addresses Jesus. And she starts speaking to Jesus, and she expresses her concerns, and she speaks to Jesus just how frustrating it is to be in the kitchen working and see her sister sitting at the feet of Jesus. And my brothers and sisters, she's going to verbalize her frustrations, and she's going to literally point out to Jesus, it ain't fair. And I need to tell you, I can stop parenthetically and tell you that life just ain't fair. Some of us gets more than our share of burden. Some of us get more than our share of trouble. Some of us get more than our share of problems. Life just isn't fair. If you think you got it bad, there's somebody worse. If you think that good passes you by, it also passes other people by. And I need to tell you, life just isn't fair. There are some people given more responsibility than others. There's a load that you have to carry that's going to be heavier than other people. Life just isn't fair. And whoever said that life is fair, life is not fair. And sometimes you get put in a situation where you have to do more than other people. And sometimes it looks like, Sister Carrie Lou, that other people haven't been given to do as much as you've been given to do. But let me tell you, to whom much has been given, much is required. And sometimes people are given a burden based on their ability. They can't carry much. That's why they ain't given much. They're not able to bear under the heavy weight and the frustration and the agony and the pain that life produces we see two different individuals. Both of them had prepared it before, but one had decided to get the teachings of Jesus, and the other one was faithful to prepare the meal for Jesus. But both of them had a significant responsibility. Both of them had a job, but she said to Jesus, she spoke a word to Jesus. She was distracted. That's what the word cumbersome means. It literally means she was distracted. She was burdened. She was overwhelmed by life. And I need to stop and tell you again, you will become overwhelmed. You will become distracted. You will become burdened simply because of what you have been called to do, what you are responsible for. It will all become burdensome. It will all become distracting. And if it becomes burdensome, it will become distracting. If it becomes overwhelming, it will become frustrating. My brothers and sisters, there are some things in life that will overwhelm you. Some things in life that will distract you. And it's hard if you've never been down the road of having children and you working and doing the best that you can, trying to provide a roof and clothes and food and provide the basic necessities in life, when your kids then put in the mix of all of that a whole bunch of foolishness. You working and trying to carry the load and the responsibility that is yours to carry, and then you have to be distracted by a whole bunch of foolishness, a whole bunch of craziness. You got to learn how to carry it all. Because I need to tell you, God will put more on you than you can bear. Sometimes he puts more on you than you can bear so you can ask him for help. But let me give you this promise. He'll never put more on you than he put in you to bear what he puts on you. You won't ever collapse under the weight. You might get tired. You might feel broken down. You might get frustrated. But whatever he puts on you ain't going to destroy you, but it's going to strengthen you. It's going to strengthen you for the next set of frustration, problems, and troubles that come up in your life. Because sometimes God is preparing you for what has not yet happened in your life. Because you got to read Luke chapter 10, but don't forget John chapter 11. Because in this text, she's frustrated because her sister is not helping her. But there's a greater burden that's going to come. Her brother is going to get sick unto death. She's going to need strength to deal with the second problem. And Jesus is trying to tell her, you can deal with it because I'm going to teach you how to deal with this problem. In other words, what Jesus says, I'm not going to make Mary do anything. This is your burden to carry. And burdens sometimes prepare us for what has not yet happened in our lives. Sometimes it is a greater tragedy. It is a more difficult situation we're going to face. But the only way you're going to be able to face it is to carry the burdens that you're carrying right now in your life. And this is what she said to Jesus. Do thou carest that my sister have left me alone. Now listen, I don't have time to really deal with this, but how many of us, or y'all, or we up in here have felt left alone? Especially after we have been trying. Especially because we care. Especially because we never drop the loads that are put on our back. We're faithful to God. We serve. We love people. We do the best we can, but we feel left alone. And left alone by people that should know better, should do better, that should never leave us alone, especially when they started out with us, especially when they worked with us, when we are used to them being by our side and on our side. This was very difficult for Martha because this was her sister. And she said to him, do you care that my sister have left me alone? Alone to do this alone to carry this burden alone to carry out this responsibility alone. And my brothers and sisters, I need to tell you, in this digital age, you can be surrounded by a whole bunch of people and still feel alone. Do I have any witnesses in here? Because we do know there were at least 15 people in this room, but yet Martha felt alone. She felt by herself. And so many Christians, so many people who are charged with responsibility, when the going gets tough and the tough get going, they still feel alone. She says, do you care that my sister have left me alone. And this is what Martha suggested to Jesus, bid her. And literally that word bid, make her, force her to come and help me. Force her to leave what she's doing to come and help me. Carry my burden, carry out my responsibility. My brothers and sisters, I do love in this text that Jesus didn't bid her, force her, or make her go do anything. Jesus wasn't going to make Mary stop doing what she was doing to go help Martha doing what she was doing. Because what Jesus says, what Mary is doing is a good thing, and Martha, what you're doing is a good thing. And my brothers and sisters, sometimes people are busy with their own stuff. They got their own priority. They got their own focus. They got their own dreams. And what we do is sometimes we misunderstand that the burden we decided to pick up and carry in life ain't other folks. That's our burden. And we can't expect people to help us carry our burdens all the time. We can't expect people to quit doing what they're doing that they enjoy, that they have decided to engage in to help us. And Christians need to realize sometimes you have to walk this journey alone. Sometimes it is very lonely to serve God. It is very lonely and sometimes in despair to serve God. You remember that Elijah was on Mount Carmel. He defeated the priest of Baal, but the same Elijah is hiding in a cave and saying to God that there's nobody left but me. After he had experienced this great victory on Mount Carmel, he's now in a cave and he feels all alone. And my brothers and sisters, I need to tell you, just because you feel alone don't mean you ain't all alone. Because listen, she might have felt alone and abandoned by her own sister, but she failed to realize that she wasn't alone. Jesus was in the house. And I need to tell you, my brothers and sisters, even when you feel alone, always remember that Jesus is somewhere close by. He sees you. He knows what you're going through, and he does care, but he doesn't care whether other people are involved. He does care about what you're going through, and he wants you to know that he knows what you're going through. Because let me tell you, what Jesus says in verse 41 lets me know that he cared about Martha. Because you got to read the interpretation of this text and your understanding of it, that Jesus was very concerned about what Martha was going through. Because this is what Jesus says in verse 41, and Jesus answered and said unto her, Martha, Martha. And if Jesus says your name twice, he's really trying to get your attention, but he's also trying to speak just how concerned he is. He says, Martha, Martha, thou art careful and troubled about many things. Jesus literally says, I understand how you feel. I know what you're going through. And really, Mary is not the issue. You got some other issues that you're struggling with. Some other issues that are distracting you. Some other issues that you're burdened with. And my brothers and sisters, it takes a lot to be faithful to God at the church and you got other things going on in your personal life. Do I have any witnesses in here? And I can stop parenthetically and tell you, on Sunday morning when I come here, listen, your problems ain't the only problems that's on my mind. Your soul salvation ain't the only problems that's on my mind. I've got children that I have to try to parent, even as they get older, grandchildren. And this week, my mother broke her leg, and I've been back and forth to the hospital. I've been trying to take care of her to make sure her needs are met. And sometimes you get overwhelmed by life. And sometimes the issues you have, people don't see because you don't broadcast them. But sometimes you be going through way more than what people see and what people know. Do I have any witnesses in here? And what Jesus says, you got a whole lot of issues going on. And the issue that you are raising right now, that's really not what you're frustrated about. But there's some stuff that we really ain't going to talk about in this setting. Do I have any witnesses in here? Sometimes life can overwhelm you and it looks like a person is all right. They got things together, but in reality, they got some secret stuff going on, some stuff that is not discussed in public, stuff that is hidden from public view that they are struggling with, and people are trying to hold it up and hold it together all at the same time. And do I have anybody in here that's got some stuff you trying to hold up and hold together at the same time? And And when people look at you, they don't understand what you're going through. But I come to tell you, God knows. He knows everything that you're going through. He knows what you're trying to hold up and what you're trying to hold together. He knows every minute detail of what's going on in your life. And there are people who think they're the only one overwhelmed. But they don't really understand just how much pressure is on you, around you. And sometimes they don't understand that if you could, you'd fall apart, break down, but you can't. You got to be strong in the midst of all that you're going through. You're dealing with multiple issues all at the same time. And Jesus says to Martha, what you have going on is greater than the issue that you've raised. And Jesus says, I can tell you, in a hypothetical sense, Jesus says, you got so many issues going on, Martha, we couldn't really deal with all of them in this city. It would take more than this moment to deal with all that you got going on. And if the truth be told, Sunday morning ain't long enough to deal with some of the issues that we, the people sitting in the pew and the person in the pulpit, have going on in our lives. Do I have any witnesses in here? Because sometimes we got a heck of a lot more going on than what you know we got going on. Because listen, gas prices it's just one of the problems we're faced with. You don't even understand. I ain't got enough money to even get the gas to get back and forth. And then sometimes you have to make tough choices, whether it's gas or food, whether it's gas or the field trip you need to send your daughter on, or the fee you need to pay for them to participate in a school activity. And I need to tell somebody, you need to quit judging folk because you don't know what people are going through. You don't know what the hell people have to face every day, the difficulty they have to deal with, the struggle that they have, how hard life is it, and we're quick to pass judgment. And the first thing we said, people ought to be able to do better. Just because you can do better, it doesn't mean everybody is in your situation. Some people are doing the best that they can. They're struggling. Martha was under all of this pressure. And Jesus didn't ignore it. Jesus addressed it and said, Martha, you got a lot of things going on. But let me give you this as I'm closing, because I really wanted to look at the activities in Luke chapter 10, but I also want to go to John chapter 11, because she is faithful and frustrated. But in John chapter 11, in John's gospel, John deals with this, that this wasn't the last crisis that she dealt with. She dealt with the crisis of getting Jesus involved because she thought she was doing too much and Mary wasn't doing enough. Now listen, I could stop parenthetically and pause and tell you there's going to be a whole lot of times where it looks like you're doing more than people that you help and work with and walk with in life. Do you ever feel exhausted because you're giving more than what you're getting? You're giving more than what people are giving that should be carrying the same amount of the load. But let me tell you, in John chapter 11, they faced the greatest crisis in their life. Now listen, I don't know how I felt about Jesus. I'm just human. I think I would have felt the same way that Martha and Mary felt, because they sent Jesus the information about Lazarus in time. They told him 3 days before he died that he was sick. Matter of fact, when the news got to Jesus, they said, the one whom thou lovest is sick. And many scholars believe they said he's sick unto death. And Jesus intentionally delayed his going. Matter of fact, he could have went when he got the message, but he delayed it. Then he could have went the day after, but he delayed it. And then he could have went the third day, but he delayed it. And John chapter 11, it literally says that when Jesus finally decided to go, some of the Jews saw Jesus coming. When he told Martha, Martha went out to meet Jesus, and she verbalized her frustration because she said to him, if you would have been here, our brother wouldn't have died. You could have saved us from this pain, this tragedy, this disappointment, this hurt. You could have exempted us from having to go through this. You loved him. We loved him. And now he was sick, and now he's dead. And if you would have been here, our brother would not have died. And Jesus says, listen, he ain't dead, he gonna live. And Martha says to him, I know he's gonna live in the resurrection, but that ain't what I'm talking about. I'm not talking about the future, I'm talking about right now. I'm talking about right now. I want to close by telling you that sometimes when you are faithful to God, you're going to be frustrated. And sometimes even when you're faithful to God and you do everything you're supposed to do right, it doesn't mean that bad things are going to happen. Because listen, it looked like faithful service should have been faithfully rewarded by Jesus. Because it was the home of Mary, Martha, and Lazarus, where Jesus used it as refreshment, a retreat, to refuel, to have a fellowship meal. And it looked like when they called Jesus, he should have dropped everything and came to their rescue. But that John chapter 11 says he didn't. And sometimes he might delay his coming. Jesus might just slow his arrival or delay his arrival. But that doesn't mean that he's not going to do something. It doesn't mean that he can't do something. But sometimes he has a purpose of letting things get out of hand. And if I had time, I'd explain to you, you got to know when to shout. Sometimes he lets things get out of hand, not to hurt you, but to demonstrate to you that he has all power in his hand. So don't panic when things get out of hand. As long as Jesus show up, and I know he's going to show up, let things get out of hand, because when they get out of hand, that's breeding ground for him to perform a miracle. And see, sometimes you panic when things start falling apart in your life. Things don't work together. It seems like nothing is working out the way you think it ought to work. He's not coming when you need him the most. But sometimes when God sends chaos in your life, that is a breeding ground for God to perform a miracle that will blow your mind. So don't give up. Don't become so frustrated that you throw in the towel, that you lose faith, or that you quit. Be faithful, and sometimes in the midst of your trouble, he'll show up just when he may not come when you want him, but he'll show up on time. Because when he did show up, two things he did, and I'm closing. When Jesus showed up in that John text, the first thing he done is the most sentimental, personal, and real thing that he should have done. He wept. You know why he wept? Because he wanted Martha and Mary to know, I feel your pain. I loved your brother, and he was special to me. That's what he did. He wept with them because he knew their pain. They were kin by blood, but Jesus was kin by friendship with Lazarus. And so he wept. That's an exciting thing to know that whenever I shed tears, he sheds tears. Whenever I feel pain, he feels my pain. But let me give you the most exciting thing he did. He raised Lazarus from the dead. A situation where Martha said, if you would have been here, he never would have died. But he had been dead now for 3 days. And if you notice the text, the Jews could not let a body stay out of the ground. When a person died, they had to have the funeral immediately. So this really wasn't the funeral. It was more like the celebration after the funeral. They were at the gravesite, visiting the gravesite, because day one, when he died, they went ahead and put him in the tomb. And so when Jesus met him, there were professional mourners in Jerusalem who were Jews, and they would mourn for the dead with the living to express their condolences. And so when Jesus arrived, they were at the point 3 days later where there were professional mourners at the gravesite of Lazarus, and Mary and Martha was there because that's what you did. You were there to grieve, and those people who were there were with you there to grieve. And everybody thought the situation was beyond repair, that it was over. But let me give you this. He raised Lazarus from the dead. Now, I'm going to be very dramatic in closing this message, because, see, this is the power of Jesus. That Jesus stood outside the tomb, and Lazarus had already been wrapped in his grave clothes, and he had already transitioned from life to death, stepped out outside of life into death. Dr. Wilson would say, stepped off the back porch of time onto the front porch of eternity, enjoying eternal bliss. But Jesus showed up, stood outside of the grave, and he called Lazarus by name. And many old black Negro scholars said that if he wouldn't have called Lazarus by name, every dead person in Jerusalem would have got it. But he had to be specific. That's how much power that he had to raise the dead. And he said, Lazarus, come forth. And my brothers and sisters, when Lazarus came forth, it was liberation, it was celebration, it was excitement. And what Jesus did by raising Lazarus from the dead, he turned Martha's frustration into celebration. And I need to tell somebody, I know you are frustrated, but be faithful to God still and yet in spite of, and God will turn your frustration into celebration. And I know I got some witnesses in here, because there are some people in here, you are in the midst of being frustrated while you're being faithful, but let me tell you, keep on being faithful. And if you just wait a while, don't give up, stay in the fight, stay on the battlefield. Listen, weeping endure for a night, but joy comes in the morning. God will turn your frustration into celebration, and he will bring about a resurrection in your life. Don't give up. Don't give in. You might have to serve and be faithful while you're frustrated. And God will answer every prayer. He will meet every one of your needs. And he will not leave you in disappointment, even though you're disappointed in life. This text teaches us how to be faithful and frustrated all at the same time. But don't let your frustrations make you throw in the towel and quit. Don't ever give up. Don't ever give in. Don't ever say it's too late. Don't let the weight that's on you and the frustration around you cause you to throw in the towel. You might feel alone. You might feel like you're by yourself. You might feel abandoned by those who are supposed to be walking with you and to strengthen you, to help you carry your burdens. But don't give up. You know, the greatest lesson in this text is this. Don't ever be overwhelmed by what you see around you. Because what you see around you is not greater than who you have with you. Because boy, if I looked around in my life, I'd be very frustrated. But what keeps me motivated and faithful is no matter what's going on around me, it's not greater than he who is with me. Because he says, I'm greater than the whole world against you. And Paul says, I can do all things through Christ that strengthens me, every head bowed and every eye closed. You might have to serve God. And while serving God and being faithful to God, you can become very frustrated. And listen, I live what I preach. Every Sunday, I'm committed to be faithful to God at 2 churches and to sow in the lives of 2 different groups and congregation and 2 sets of sheep. And I'm determined to be faithful. And yes, I get frustrated. And sometimes I feel like throwing in the towel and waving the white flag and surrendering under the pressures of life. And sometimes my life, even though I'm saved, even though I pray, even though I fast, even though I trust God, frustration sets in. But sometimes God is faithful to do just what he said. He says that he would be with us even to the end of the age. He says, cast your cares upon him. God cares for you and he cares for me. Under the Sierra pickup I have, under the hood is something very unusual. There's two battery ports and there's 2 places to put batteries. And the reason why the manufacturer put 2 batteries is because one battery might lose energy and the truck won't be able to be powered up. But what he did, he put a contingency plan under the hood that you really can't see on the outside. And it's not what's in every vehicle, it's just unique to this vehicle. Because the manufacturer realized that battery 1 might go out, but neither fear nor to fret. Battery 2 is under there and it's in there. And all you have to do is unhook to battery 1 to hook up to battery 2. Because the manufacturers put a reserve and had a contingency plan. Pastor, how does that relate to me? You know why you're still here? Because God put more in you than what you know. And what he put in you is what's keeping you alive, keeping you in the fight, keeping you faithful, keeping you with the resilience not to give up. To trust God through the difficult times when you feel abandoned and alone. To trust God when you feel like you lost what you love. The times when you feel like he's abandoned you and left you alone. God has put something in you. That's why you're still standing. Heavenly Father, thank you for your word. Let us take from this lesson the lessons that Martha teaches us, but also the lessons you teach us in the life of Martha. That you are concerned about every care that's on us and the pressure that is around us, but also you can take a dead situation and bring it back to life. If we trust you in the process, help us to be faithful even when we're frustrated. We ask this in Jesus' name. Amen and amen. Thank you so much to all of you, my brothers and my sisters. Again, thank you for being a part of this worship service. And thank you for coming to share so many of you in